I've never shared this story publicly, but I'm gonna do it now, because it humbles him a little bit. Oh, oh yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm jumping ahead. Yeah. So who do I bring up for that? Just kidding. We're gonna have our band come back up, right? Our guest band. Okay, they can make their way up. Okay.
Okay. Yes, so please welcome our Pacifica family who's going to come up, and we have the special honor of having them lead us.
in Hawaii. So we're gonna go into well, let's thank the Hawaiians again for that. Thank you guys. They didn't come a long ways for nothing. They came to lead us in that time. Thank you guys. But now we're going to go into our speaker for tonight. And there's only one. I was just joking about the 10, so don't freak out. But I wanted to share a story. I share with some people. But so I've known Mark Charles since since I was in high school. He was a junior varsity basketball coach. So I remember seeing him from afar. And then later on, after I graduated, me and my wife came back to live at Rehoboth for a little while. And then at Rehoboth, every morning at 5:30, they would play basketball. Well, on Mondays and Thursdays. And one Thursday, this was a long time ago, before my first child, and I could still run without pain. I would go play, and I remember Mark being there playing basketball. And I hadn't seen him in a long time, but there was this one play where I was near the half-court line, and then we got the ball, and I was ready to go sprint down as fast as I can for a free layup, and someone grabbed me from behind, and I'm pretty sure it was Mark Charles that grabbed me. I don't know if he remembers it. He's probably going to deny it. But he grabbed me so I wouldn't be able to go down and score. So the ball went over, and when I was kind of mad, you know. Who gets angry playing sports and that happens? I mean, I think we all kind of do that. But anyway, let's all welcome up tonight's speaker, Mark Charles.
Thank you. So Yacht A, everybody. Yacht A. Yacht Mark Charles Yinashia. Sin Beke Danan Nashlin, the Tohiglin Bashachin. Sin Beke Danan Dashache, the Tochini Dashanella. In the Navajo culture, when you introduce yourself, you always give your 4 clans, and we're a matrilineal people, and our identities come from our mother's mother. And so my mother's mother is American of Dutch heritage, and so I say Sin Beke Danan Nashlin. Translated, that means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My father's mother, my second clan, is Tohiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Tsinbeke Dene. Then my fourth clan, my father's father, is Totachitni, and that's the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. I want to also acknowledge, as many others have, my deep appreciation and honor for the Pima and the Maricopa. The nations that have invited us here onto their lands, that have stewarded these lands for hundreds, even thousands of years, and that have been so gracious to allow us to be here with them, to even serve us some of their food, to share some of their stories, and allow some of their leaders and their elders to join us in these sessions. And so if we can just give a round of applause again, as we've done many times, to the Pima and the Maricopa people. I also want to let you know that on your chairs tonight, there was a piece of paper here, and this is just a little bit of an introduction for you of one of our first kind of sponsors, but also friends who is joining us. And I want to have Alan Buck, if he will stand up. Many of you have seen Alan sitting in the back. He's not just hanging out selling his rugs, but he is actually a Methodist pastor of a native church in Portland, and he is among the leadership among a lot of the churches, and especially the native churches in the Pacific Northwest area, and he is very interested in native leadership development. And so, believe it or not, while there are many native churches around the nation, there are not many native pastors and native leaders. And so if you are interested as a native young person to do church leadership, to become a pastor, or to even just get some training in leadership development, Alan is in the back, and he's here all day today. He is here all day tomorrow, and he would love to have some dialogue with you about some of the programs they are doing and some of the things that they are involved in within the Methodist Church. I had a chance to be with their congregation on Indigenous Peoples Day. And we had a great time talking about Indigenous peoples, and they're doing some really wonderful things with the drum in their church. And so I highly recommend, it'll be well worth your time to sit down and talk with Alan and to find out more about the work they're doing in the Pacific Northwest. So thank you for being here, Alan. Can we give Alan a round of applause? And we're so glad that he's here. And also, Dave is sitting in the back also, and he is from InterVarsity, and he is going to be doing a seminar, am I correct, on, he's doing a table on what? Starting something native. So if you would like to hear just from Dave about starting a work that's native, you can go back and talk with him, and we are grateful that you could be here with us tonight too, Dave, so thank you very much. Earlier this evening, we had talked, and earlier today, you heard many of us using the language of what does it mean that as Native peoples, we are the hosts of the land? And how do we how do we step into our role as the host? And I want to talk about this for a little bit tonight, because I think this is so important for us, especially as not only Native peoples, but Native peoples that are wrestling with what does it mean to be Native and be Christian? What does it mean to follow this man named Jesus, even though the message of Jesus and our introduction to Jesus may have come in a very, very colonial way? And so not only do we have to understand what does it mean for us to be Christian, for us to be Native and be Christian, but I also think we have to mean what does it mean for us to be Native and to be Christian and to be the host people of this land. And I want to help you understand even some of my journey as I've begun to understand this, because I started as a pastor probably about almost 20 years ago now. I was the pastor of a church in Denver called the Christian Indian Center, and our congregation was wrestling with what does it mean to be Native and be Christian. And through that dialogue, I met many indigenous leaders and Native leaders from around the world, which helped transform some of my thinking about this topic. But after 2 years, we decided to move back to the reservation because I had grown up in a border town, basically in a Dutch ghetto known as Rehoboth, which is where Donnie falsely accused me of holding him back while he was clearly traveling with the ball. But anyway, so I digress. To save face, but anyway, I digress. But so I grew up in this mission compound that was run by Dutch American Christians. My Navajo grandparents lived there. I had relatives on the reservation, but my grandparents were both boarding school survivors, and so they didn't speak the language and teach it to my father, and so he didn't know what to teach it to me. And so I grew up in this very colonial setting. And then in pastoring the church and realizing that I was starting to engage in a dialogue on contextualizing worship, and yet I didn't even know my own language, and I had never lived on my own reservation. And so my wife and my son and we moved back from Denver to the Navajo Nation, and we lived in Susie Silversmith's Hogan, which is out in an area called Cross Canyon. We were 6 miles off the nearest paved road on a dirt road. There was no running water, no electricity. We lived in a 25-foot log hogan with a dirt floor, log walls. We hauled our water, lived by candlelight, cooked over a camp stove, used an outhouse, and we were living in a very much off the grid in a fairly traditional type setting. And we moved there prepared to live in this manner. But the thing that took me by surprise, and some of you who've heard me speak before know some of the story, but the thing that took us most by surprise is that we learned very quickly that by and large, the only group of non-natives who come to Indian reservations are those who come to give us charity, are those who come to take our picture. And almost no one comes for the purpose of building relationship and getting to know us. And this shocked me and surprised me, but I also wasn't fully prepared for what it did to me psychologically, which is I began to feel very insecure about the color of my skin, the house I lived in, and the community I was a part of. So we lived out in this hogan. We were out in the middle of nowhere, and yet you would have to go into town to do business, whether it was to work a job or whether it was to do your grocery shopping and all these other things. And so, but whenever you did that, you'd have to shower because living in the Hogan is not necessarily the most pleasant smelling thing with the sheep and everything else. And so you'd have to find a place to shower or take a sponge bath in the Hogan. And so there's a lot of places in the border towns, like gymnasiums and chapter houses on the reservation, where you can go and take a shower. And this was not an uncommon thing, where you would find natives from our community, Navajo people, who would go into Gallup, and there was a few gyms and community centers where you could pay like $3 and go and take a shower. And I had to go into Gallup one day. I had some meetings, and so I went in early so I could take a shower before I went to my meeting. And as I was in the shower, and I got out, and I was getting dressed, and I was in the room by myself, and this group of non-native men, probably 3 or 4 of them, came in, and they were members of this gym, and they had been there playing racquetball. And they didn't say a word to me, and I didn't say a word to them. But as we were going about our business, and they were toweling off and just talking and chatting, and I was getting dressed after my shower, and I'm sitting there thinking, I wonder if these men know that I probably have a better education than they do because I went to UCLA. And I'm also thinking, I wonder if they know that because I work as a computer programmer, I probably earn a higher hourly rate than they do. And I'm thinking all of these very defensive thoughts. I'm feeling incredibly insecure. And I realize it's because I'm afraid they're looking at me like I'm just another drunk who's come into Gallup, who spent a long weekend there, and now Monday morning is getting ready to clean up again and go to a meeting or go back to work. And I'm very afraid that they're seeing me as just another drunk Indian. And so I'm having all these deeply insecure thoughts going through my mind, and they walk out of the room, and I never said a word to them, and they never said a word to me, and I'm sitting there just left looking in the mirror like, when did I become so incredibly insecure? What is it that made me feel like I was such less than them just because I don't have running water and I'm here taking a shower? And I realized that living in the community I lived in and having the majority, and I'm talking 90 to 95% of my interaction with white people was becoming, it really boiled down to 3 conversations. How can we help you? How can we learn something trivial from you? Or what is it like to live in a Hogan? And that was the extent of almost all of my conversations with white people for month after month, week after week, and even year after year. And as that, I began to allow that to saturate into me, I realized I was becoming very, very, very insecure. And I didn't know how to conduct myself. I didn't know how to respond to people. And I was not only becoming angry because I was learning about the history and understanding the incredible injustices of what happened to our community and why our community was the way it was, but I was also feeling very insecure, like I didn't even have a place in this broader society. I felt much more comfortable living in the Hogan just around the people I was with, but when I would go into Gallup, I would go into other places, I would either feel very angry or I would feel very insecure. And this went on we lived in that Hogan for 3 years. And during that time, I remember there were days where I would get so mad. I would feel so angry. And I said to my wife one day, I said, I finally understand why so many white people drink. Like, this finally makes perfect sense to me. I feel like, and I feel like I'm in this pain, and I'm trying to tell people about it and to talk about it, and nobody's listening, and nobody hears me, and nobody wants to pay attention, and no one wants to have a conversation. It's like I'm screaming, and yet no one can hear my screams except myself. And it was this really kind of painful and frustrating experience of living there, and I didn't know what to do about it. And one day I was writing a letter to some friends of mine, and this was like the 10th time. These are non-native friends, and we're not having this conversation face to face because they're not coming to the reservation. And so we're having it over, I'm writing them letters, and we're talking over the phone. And every time we're talking about this history, I can feel my anger welling up in me more and more until finally I have to hang up the phone so I don't start yelling at my friends. And so I learned how to disconnect from this story emotionally, and I learned how to kind of separate myself from it so I can talk like I'm talking about something I read in the newspaper. And then I can stay in the conversation longer, but then it's not long until my friends are saying, well, I didn't do that to your people. It wasn't my family that did those things, and soon they're going to hang up the phone because they're so frustrated and they're so defensive about what I'm trying to say. And so I'm writing a letter to some friends of mine. This is like the 10th time trying to get them to understand how I feel. And in my letter, I say, being Native American and living on our reservation in the middle of this country, it feels like our Native peoples are this old grandmother who has a very large and a very beautiful house. And years ago, some people came into our house and they locked us upstairs in the bedroom. Today, our house is full of people. They're sitting on our furniture, they're eating our food, they're having a party inside our house. Now, they've since come upstairs and they've unlocked the door to our bedroom, but it's much later and we're tired, we're old, we're weak, we're sick, so we can't or we don't come out. But the thing that hurts us the most, the thing that causes us the most pain, is that virtually nobody from this party ever comes upstairs, seeks out the grandmother in the bedroom, sits down next to her on the bed, takes her hand, and simply says, "Ahiaha, thank you for letting us be in your house." I wrote that and I'm like, that's it. That's exactly how I'm feeling. I don't feel like I'm the host in my own house. And I started sharing that with people around me in my community, some of our elders. And they would say things like, I've lived here all my life and I've always struggled to articulate how it feels, and you're hitting the nail on the head. And then I would go off the reservation and share this with non-natives. And they would come up to me, and instead of being defensive or angry or justifying themselves, they would say, what does it look like to say thank you? How does my family, how does my community, how does my church, how does my town, how does my nation express gratitude to the host people of this land? See, now we're having a very, very different conversation. Now, instead of having a conversation about victim and oppressor, now we're having a conversation about what I think is the heart of the matter, which is we have this reversal of roles, right? This reversal of roles where we literally have 300 million undocumented immigrants running around acting like they own the place. And we have 6 million indigenous hosts of the land being treated like unwanted guests in someone else's house. There's this reversal of roles, and we so simply just assume it because so much about the message that we hear as Native peoples day after day after day is that we are the helpless victims of an oppressive colonial government. And they will point to the alcoholism, they will point to the unemployment, they will point to the lack of sovereignty, they will point to the lack of resources, they will point to the poor education, they will point to all these things, and they will say it with tears in their eyes and with this shaky voice and say, you people have been so mistreated and treated unjustly, and you have been victimized, and you have been hurt, and all these things, and they will go on and on and on, and soon we will so easily start to believe that we are the helpless victims of an oppressive colonial government, forgetting that we are the host people of the land. Forgetting that we have creation stories that take place here. Forgetting that long before these missionaries came in and started talking about Jesus, our people already had a relationship with Creator. We forget all these things because we get boxed into this victim mentality, and we forget that we are not the helpless victims of an oppressive colonial government. We are the host people of the land. And that is something that we need to begin stepping into and living into and intentionally owning. And this has incredibly deep implications for what does it mean for us to live here. I remember one day I was out herding sheep with a friend of mine. He had grown up out near the Hogan where I was living. He spoke better Navajo than English. He was a boarding school survivor. We're out herding sheep one day. This is early 2000s. George Bush is president, and he's just introduced this dialogue on immigration reform. And I said to my friend, I said, you know, the whole nation's talking about immigration reform. I'm curious, what are your thoughts? And he said, well, there's already so many of them here. Maybe we shouldn't worry about borders anymore. Now, if you're anywhere else in the country, you think he's talking about the 14 million undocumented who've come over the southern border. But because we're on the reservation, because we're both Native, because he's a boarding school survivor, you have to pause and ask, is he talking about the 14 million or the 300 million? And I love the ambiguity so much, I didn't even ask him to clarify. I just left it there. I'm like, that's perfect. Don't say anything else. And I began telling people that without Native peoples at the table, without the indigenous hosts of the land at the table, the United States of America is incapable of comprehensively and justly reforming immigration law. Without Natives at the table, all you have is one generation of undocumented immigrants trying to figure out what to do with another generation of undocumented immigrants, and there's no integrity in the dialogue. What does it mean for us to be the host people of the land? What does it mean for us to step into our role as the hosts? What does it mean for us to put just as much of an importance of our understanding of our traditional knowledge of Creator against the missionaries' understanding of who God is? There's a story of a friend of mine. It's actually in our book. I just published a book. It went into the bookstores last week, or this week, Tuesday, just a couple days ago. It's called Unsettling Truth. And it is the story of how the church wrote a doctrine of discovery, and how this doctrine of discovery has become embedded into the foundations of the nation and has really caused havoc, not only within the church, but within the nation. It presses the question of that you, not even the question, but it presses the statement that you cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. It's called stealing. And anyway, there's a story I tell in this book about my friend who is from Kenya, and his traditional people are called the Kikuyu. And his grandfather was one of the members of their tribe when the first missionary came in. And this missionary came in, he was a white missionary, and he learned their language, and he began teaching the Kikuyu about Jesus and about God. And my friend's grandfather had gone from Africa into Europe and had been trained in English, and he understood some of their language, and some of the people in their village converted, and they wanted to have the Bible in their language, and so they asked the missionary if they could translate it into their language, and my friend's grandfather was one of the people who was helping work on this translation. And the translation was going along well until they came to the first mention of the word God, and the Kikuyu called God Ngai. It's the word they use for God, and the missionary was very adamant. He was very firm. He said, we cannot use this word Ngai in the scripture because this is your pagan understanding of God, and we don't want to corrupt these holy scriptures with your pagan's beliefs. And my friend's grandfather said to the missionary, he said, sir, our people have known Ngai for centuries. We see him in creation around us. We have stories about him. We have a relationship with Ngai. We know who Creator is, and we understand him. And if you write this book, if you translate this book and you don't use our word Ngai for Creator in this book, then this book will only be about the white man's God. But if you allow us to use our word for Creator in this book, then this book will be an extension. We knew about Ngai, we knew about Creator, we didn't know he had a son named Jesus. And so if you want us to understand Jesus only as the white man's God, then do it your way. But if you want this understanding to be rooted in who we already know Creator to be, then this is a much better way to do it. See, this is what it means for us as Native peoples to understand that we're the host people of the land. Western Christianity has this heretical belief that tells them that they have a unique and special relationship with God, and they understand who God is the best, and they are the ones responsible for taking God around the world. And I love to tell white missionaries that there are very few places, if any, in the world where you can actually bring God. Creator has already been here. He made the entire world. Creator has relationship with peoples and communities and cultures all over the world in different ethnic groups. All of us know Creator. We may not know Jesus, but we all know Creator. And we can start that relationship there. And so there are very few places, if any, where a white missionary can actually bring God for the first time. Because God is already there. He's already been at work. God has already been working in these communities and revealing himself to these communities for hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of years prior to these white missionaries coming in. And this is what it means for us, even as Native peoples, to not feel inferior just because we don't have all the theological training, or we don't have all the fancy words and the understanding of the Latin and all these things that they have that they think make them understand God better than we do. In fact, there's something we have as Native peoples that white missionaries don't have. And that's a creation story. See, every group of people all over the world have creation stories. Creation stories aren't scientific stories. They're not A, B, C, D. This is the science of how creation happened. Creation stories are about how a people understand their relationship to Creator and their relationship to their surroundings. And so, because this nation was colonized, because everyone who came over here from Europe and crossed this pond, this sea on their ships, they left their lands, they left their homes, they left what they understood and knew, they left their creation stories, and they came here largely seeking some sort of prosperity. Now, they never asked for, nor have they ever been given permission to be here. They have no understanding of why these mountains sit over here. They have no knowledge of why these rivers flow over there. And this is why they live here, like you might live in a hotel room. Right? We know how to live. You're all living in hotel rooms right now, right? We know how we live in hotel rooms as compared to our own house, right? Someone else will clean it up. Someone else will do the laundry. Someone else will fix the bed. Someone else will cover up this punch stain on the floor. Someone else will clean this. They're living here like they live in a hotel room because they don't understand the stories of this room. They don't understand why these things are here and why those things are over there and all these things. And this is why most Western European Christians they're the ones most adamant about a 7-day creation story. And they're the ones who think that God created the heavens and the earth in 7 24-hour days, and this is the signs of how he did it, and the Bible tells it of this way. They think that because they don't have creation stories of their own. They've forgotten their creation stories, and so they've co-opted these Middle Eastern creation stories, and they're treating them like science textbooks. That's not the purpose for a creation story. When they say God created, the Bible tells us exactly how God created the heavens and the earth, I say, really, which story is true then? Because there's two of them in the Bible. There's one where humans are created first and one where humans are created last. So which one is the true one? What do you mean there's two? Read your Bible. There's two of them in there. Tell me which one's the science and which one's the... They don't know. Why do they do this? Because they've forgotten their creation stories, and so they've co-opted this Middle Eastern creation story, which is the one that gets included in the Bible. Do you understand? Ever wonder why the creation story in the Bible names the rivers? Right? The rivers are named in the creation stories in the Bible. Why? Because they're helping the people of the Middle East make sense of the lands that they're living in. Just like our creation stories, right? They tell us why this mountain sits over there, why that river flows over there. These stories are what connect us to this land. These stories are what encourage us to live here sustainably. These stories are what train us how to live here with respect and in a good way. This is why most white Europeans are more concerned about what's happening in Israel and about working for peace there than about having peaceful and reconciled relationships with the people here on these lands where their houses reside. So we can't forget these things. We can't forget that you and I, as Native peoples, we have something that white Americans, white Canadians, white Europeans will never have. They can't steal it, they can't buy it, and they can't take it. And that's a legitimate connection to these lands. Never wonder why this nation robbed, they stole the Black Hills, right? And then they carved some of the faces of their most genocidal presidents into these hills. And after a while, they felt bad. And they went to the Lakota people and said, we would like to pay you. We'd like to buy these hills from you. And God bless the Lakota people. You know what they said to them? They're not for sale. You can't buy these. You can't buy legitimacy in this land. You can't buy it. You can't steal it. You can't take it. It has to be given. It has to be shared. You have to be brought in through relationship. If you look around the chaos that's going on, not just here in the U.S., but even all around Europe, all of these colonial nations are struggling with issues of migration and immigration and climate change and all these things. And these things are falling apart and they're screaming back and forth at each other and they're trying to close their borders and there's a rise in nationalism. There's all these chaos things going on. These colonial nations, including the one we live in, are nations that have never asked for nor have they been given permission to be here. They're living in these lands like someone lives in a hotel room. These are people who are in desperate need of a host. And that's where you and I step in. We know our creation stories. We have an understanding of who Creator is. We have a connection to this land. And we can begin to share that. We can begin to talk about that. We can begin to bring people into that through relationship. But if we're going to ever do that, we have to be firm and confident in the fact that we are not the helpless victims of an oppressive colonial government. We are the host people of the land. And we are living in lands that are in desperate need of a host. When I lived on the reservation, I lived there for 11 years. And these were some of the most difficult years of my life. I've never felt more insecure. I've never felt more angry. I've never felt more powerless. I've never felt more excluded. I've never felt more marginalized. I've never felt more oppressed in my entire life than the 8 years or the 11 years we lived on our reservation. But I also never felt more alive. I've never felt more connected to the land. I've never felt more in touch with my roots and understanding of who I am and where I came from and what does it mean to be a good citizen, a good member of humanity. It was so much pride to send my children to a Navajo immersion school and to see them learn the language and learn our creation stories even better than I know them. It was with so much pride that I was able to sit down with our elders and talk and hear their stories and listen to them. You know, we have these people now taking DNA tests and running all over the world. And that's fine. They're trying to find the connection. But as Native peoples, we don't have to take a DNA test. Why? Because we know our stories. We know our lands. We have a connection here. I don't need some lab in some far-off city to tell me who I am and where I've come from. I have my relatives to tell me that. I have my family to tell me that. I have these stories to tell me that. And that can give me a confidence in who I am and a confidence in my relationship with Creator that is more strong and more rooted than almost any other Western missionary out there, no matter how much education they have and how many degrees they've obtained. And this is one of the reasons why we do Would Jesus Eat Fry Bread? This is one of the reasons, because we realized that there were so many youth like you who, most of you are not boarding school survivors. Most of you did not have your language beaten out of you. Some of you may have, but most of you did not. But it was your parents and your grandparents. And it was your generation that grew up not fully understanding your language, not fully knowing your stories, not fully understanding. And the challenges was when you went back to your churches and you asked your elders and you asked the leaders of your churches, many of whom were boarding school survivors, they were now the people most adamant that no, our culture is evil and we can't bring that into the church. And we didn't want to disrespect them, but we wanted to create a space where you, as Native youth, could come and ask these questions. And where we could bring in elders who you could listen to their stories and you could hear some of the pain and some of the jokes and some of the things that they've learned of how they've coped and how they've wrestled through these histories themselves. And we could give you a relationship with them, where we could come in a way, you know, when we plan an event, a conference like this, we spend almost a year building relationship with the community before we come in. We don't even announce we're going somewhere until we have the permission of the people whose land we want to go to allow us to come. We spend a lot of time as a leadership team building relationship and making sure we follow proper protocol, because we want, when you and your fellow students come into these rooms, we want not just us to be here, we want the local community to be here to share their stories and their creation stories and what does it mean for them to be on this land, to take you to their museums and show you the things that they've learned about living well here. Because that's the way you do it. When not only you are the host people of your own lands, but you're interacting with other people who are the host people of their lands. This is why we can never stay on schedule, right? This is why we always go over, because we don't want to cut someone off. I can't tell you how many conferences I've been at where they've cut me off because we've gone over the schedule. We do not do here. We work hard to not do that here, because when there is someone in front who needs to have something to say, we want them to say what God has put on their heart. Because this is what it means to be the host people of the land. And so I want all of you, when you think about these things, when you go home from these conferences, when you listen to Terry Wildman and to Susie Silversmith and to Dr. Sakina, I want you to go home and think about these things and understand the investment that these elders and these leaders are pouring into you, because they are working to try and raise you up as host people of these lands, and trying to help you to see and understand how deeply rooted and grounded you are, so that you do not have to feel insecure. You do not have to feel afraid. Maybe you don't have the same degree, maybe you don't have the same car, maybe you don't have the same house, but you have something that this culture cannot ever take from you, and it cannot give you something better, which is a rooted and a deep connection to this land. You are not the helpless victims of an oppressive colonial government. You are the host people of the land. And your people have had a relationship with Creator for hundreds, even thousands of years. And just because someone comes and says, we know this guy Jesus, and that is good because I love Jesus. Jesus is this amazing person. And I want everyone I know to also know Jesus and understand him. But you can begin to know Jesus and understand about him by understanding who Creator is. And that can begin within your own culture, within your own context, within your own creation stories. Your creation stories do not need to be thrown out just because you've come to know this guy named Jesus. There's so much work that needs to be done. There are so many things, stories that need to be shared. There are so many teachings that need to be given. There's so much guidance and correction that needs to be communicated to our neighbors and to the people who colonize this land. We are living in very, very troubled times. We are living in a period of time where whether it's environmental crises, or political crises, or division and lack of community around the nation, we are living in a time where it feels that when you turn on the news that everything around you is falling apart. What we're experiencing, what we're seeing, is we are seeing the fruits of colonialism. And we are living in a land, we are living in a nation that is in desperate need of a good host. And every single one of you is being trained not just by us, but by Creator, of what does it mean to be the host people of the land. I pray that you will never, ever forget that. I can't help my relatives. Thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you, Mark. I almost cut you off, Mark, but you just made in the nick of time. So you are the host people of the land, Jeanette, Mark Charles. So that means that's who you are and who you're born and raised to be. So we're going to jump real quick because I know it's getting a little bit later, but we're still going to push through with seminars. They won't be like an hour, but they'll probably be like a half hour. So I'm going to go through these announcements as quickly as I can. So if you guys just bear with me. First announcement is make sure your vans are full. For that, that's more for drivers. Make sure there's 12 people in each van before you leave. Tomorrow morning, what time do you meet for the vans to come back again? 8:15. No, not 9. 8:15. But we'll be back here again tomorrow. And then tonight, when we get back to the hotel, that room will still be open for you. And where is Cedric? Stand up, Cedric. So Cedric is Navajo. Yeah. So he is in charge of, what are you in charge of?
The fun room.
The fun room. Yeah, so that's this guy. So if you want to have fun, find this guy. Not that kind of fun, but I mean just like hanging out. Yeah. Yeah. Wait.
If you guys don't know where the fun room is, it's the room you registered in at the hotel.
Cool. So make sure you find him to hang out. And then tomorrow again, breakfast at 7 a.m. and then be at the White Vans at what time? 8:15. All right. So tonight we're gonna move in real quick to seminars. If you want to hear more from Mark Charles, stay or go on that side of the room. We're gonna divide this room quickly. There's a divider in the middle. So Mark Charles will be on one side. On the other side is, I believe, Hillary and JD with something with creating something native. That's the second one, make something native. And then the third one's renew in the word with Terry Wildman. He is in room 108, which is somewhere out there. Or renewing white native relations for white people. That's with Mike and Willie. And I don't see a room there. It'll be by the Coke machine or pop. Who says pop? Is pop or soda right? Which one's correct? Pop? Soda? Coke? Okay, it's pop, yeah. Cedric says pop, so that's what it is. So if you want to do something renewing white native relations, do there. Last one is for Megan Krishke. Where's Megan Krishke? She's way back there. So if you want to hang out with Megan, she's going to do something about longing for renewal with Megan. And where are you meeting at, Megan? So if you want to go hang out outside, that's where Megan will be. Meeting by tribal colleges and what? And other native service schools. And so those are the seminars. So before you head off there, there's snacks in the back. So grab some snacks and head to seminars. Thank you guys.